Hi, everyone, and welcome to my podcast, Perfect Prey. I'm glad you're here. My name is Dr. Christine Marie Cocciola, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and have a doctorate in clinical social welfare, where I researched coercive control and the impact on both adult and child victims. Most importantly, I am a survivor and a protective parent. Victims and survivors of coercive control are never to blame. But I chose the name Perfect Prey because coercive controllers, who are individuals who apparently have characterologically disordered personalities, do choose who to prey upon. They choose people who tend to be agreeable and conscientious, perhaps loyal to a fault, fixers, optimistic, and empathic. Or these coercive controllers prey upon those who are most vulnerable, including our children. It's part of their plan to gain control. How do we help our children when they're experiencing systematic, unacknowledged child abuse? We need to understand how these coercive controllers, harmful individuals, attempt to exert their power over us and our children. We need to look beyond a trauma-informed lens, but also layer it with a coercive control lens. So, let's engage in personal power conversations that will create the protective parts that will derail the coercive controller from his plan. Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of Perfect Prey. I'm so glad you're here. I hope this podcast is proving to be validating of your own experiences as a protective parent who is doing the absolute hardest work there is under the most challenging of circumstances. Parenting a child who is being coercively controlled, a child who is experiencing an unacknowledged child abuse. I've been told calling it child abuse is harsh, but I think not calling it child abuse is deceitful, a lie. Our children are traumatized just as we were by the coercion and control, whether it was overt or covert. Parenting a child that is just so overwhelmed and lost, and then blaming their behaviors as problematic versus understanding that their dysregulation, however it is manifested, hyperactivity, disassociation, aggression, or otherwise, that the blame lies entirely on the perpetrating parent. Seriously, this is not rocket science. What is the disconnect? Children in these homes are traumatized by the abusive parent, and of course, reactive, dysregulated, having behaviors that are concerning. I believe that if we were to look at so many children in elementary school and went into their environment where they are living and really unpacked it, would we see a history of this kind of behavior? It's never a victim's fault. But how much could we intervene if we actually could protect adult victims and children from the coercive controller? We do need to see this all clearly and respond to our children differently. Everyone needs to respond to these children differently. They are in harm's way all too often. They are overwhelmed, their brains in trauma reaction virtually all of the time. Imagine that you were going home and there was a wolf in the home. Sometimes the wolf was nice, sometimes not so nice. What would that do? What space would that put you in? You know that space. You've been there. Our children are trapped just like we were. They are very consistently in the reptilian part of the brain. Their brain knows they are unsafe. Even if the abuse is covert, the brain knows this. Safety for a child means being able to be who they are authentically and to be loved unconditionally. In this home, that's not occurring. They are watching and feeling in the core of their bodies that something isn't right. They see, they know, and they feel you regulating your behaviors and walking on eggshells. And they know they must do the same in order to maintain equilibrium. If you've escaped, then they are still doing this. They are doing this when they're going between your home and the coercive controller's home. And frankly, the coercive controller is setting them up to think they have to behave that way with you. The coercive controller is setting them up to think they're unsafe with you. And then oftentimes, what can happen is they become so entangled in the trap of the coercive controller that they might even align with this perpetrator. Up to this point in the podcast, I've been focusing on defining coercive control and helping us to understand who the coercive controller is. If you listened in on episode 5, you heard me unpack the Dark Triad, the fact that most victims and survivors are the antithesis of this, the Light Triad. These individuals in the Dark Triad inflict their harm maliciously and intentionally. Their primary goal is to fracture any attachment that the child has with the protective parent. That's a whole other level of evil. But I do want you to remember that the bond can never be entirely broken. That coercive controller cannot entirely fracture your child's attachment to you. Nothing can take away the attachment that you had with your child. No matter how buried it is, that attachment will always be there. So the way I see it, there are some of the things that are important to know when we're thinking about being a protective parent. This is the hardest work that you will ever do. This list is not intended to minimize what's actually going on, and it's certainly not an exhaustive list. However, I think that if we start with number 1, understanding the who, what, why, and how of the coercive controller, because number 2, he is treating his children similarly so that he might create ego compromise in them so that they, number 3, eventually become more like him, aligned with him, indoctrinated into his regime. That's the hope of the coercive controller. So that, number 4, there are soldiers to line up. And so that our children become these soldiers. And number 5, can do the work of the coercive controller for the coercive controller and harm the protective parent in the process. And number 6, ultimately, although inconsequentially, harm to the child occurs, as it did with you. The harm is so significant. It's inconsequential because the coercive controller doesn't care. And 7, there's a need to prepare yourself and armor up. We have to armor up. We have to recognize what's occurring. The more that we can see this from the 10,000-foot view and understand the tactics that they are using to harm our children, the more empowered we will be. In 8, we parent them differently, entirely different than they are told that we are. We have to show up that way. We have to show them that whatever they're hearing about us is not true. So we parent them differently. And in 9, we lead them towards clarity. We help them. There's an elephant in the room in every one of these homes. We don't have to disparage the abuser, but what we do have to do is talk about behaviors and teach our children about boundaries. Give them clarity. In 10, they regain their agency in their life. They can stand up against the coercive controller. They begin to have that voice to do so. And they return back to your loving arms. Understanding the coercive controller helps us to get what our children are experiencing. It really helps us to put the lenses on that they are having in their own experiences with the coercive controller. What is going on when your child's not with you? What are the things they're hearing? What are the things that they know about you that are actually untrue, but they truly believe they are true? We have to counteract this, and we're Understanding the coercive controller helps us to truly get what our children are experiencing and helps us by putting on those coercive control goggles to gain clarity and look through the lens of our children. What is really going on in our child's life? What are they hearing about us? What are the lies they're being told that they actually may believe are true? What are the behaviors they are witnessing in the other home? We have to be thinking about that and then be prepared when they come back to us. No matter how infrequently, we have to be prepared and have our armor on, knowing that they're going to be dysregulated and they're going to project that onto us in some way. As with all of these episodes, I'm sure some of the information is triggering, but I think, again, it's really important to understand that we have to think like the abuser. I wrote a letter quite some time ago called Compliance is an Act of Survival. It's in the voice of the abuser and what I believe the abuser's intent is. Dear child, I know that you thought you knew me so well. Perhaps I was the fun parent, and maybe even the one that did not make you do as many chores. Or maybe I was the bear in the home, or both, intermittently. It could have been that my behaviors were mostly directed to your protective parent, but you saw it. You knew what was going on. You felt it. And this led you to a feeling of confusion, never really knowing how I might react. You felt unsafe, and you certainly felt trapped, but you maybe didn't even know it. But now you have figured it out. It took you some time, and I had to reinforce my coercion over you repeatedly, but there is no mistaking it any longer. My love is conditional, and since your other parent has chosen to escape from this relationship, I will need to now intensify my control over you. You are a weapon for me. You will need to please me. Possibly you have already been doing this, or I will retaliate against the adult victim, and perhaps you too. But you already know this, since you have seen what happens to the other parent when I do not get my way. You already know clearly that you can't authentically be yourself, that I will not accept you as yourself. And in that, I am creating in you an ego compromise, impacting the development of your healthy ego. Every child deserves to know and to be loved unconditionally, to be able to be themselves freely with their parents, with their loved ones. I've stolen this from you. And now you may be learning to cover this up. This feeling of being invaluable. I'm beginning to see it in your behaviors. I'm hopeful that that's what you eventually do, that you hide from the shame of not being loved unconditionally, because of course I've betrayed your love with the protective parent, and that you create a veneer of who you really are. This makes you more pliable, more easily lined up as my soldier, makes you more like me. My retaliation for your protective parent escaping may be overt and covert, and again, both at the same time. I will undermine your relationship with this parent. I am maliciously fracturing that attachment every single moment of every single day. It all started on day one. I knew exactly what I had to do to ensure, to retain the control. I'm going to make you feel insecure, uncertain of who to trust, and ultimately you may decide to align with me simply to ensure that you do not receive the wrath of me. You will begin to regulate your behaviors. Again, you can't be yourself. You're going to anticipate my reaction, and you're learning very readily, again, how to cover up how you really feel. I also may play the hero by giving you exactly what you want, as much freedom as you request. Or perhaps I will play the victim, and then you will need to take care of me and show me sympathy. I am most certain to accuse the adult victim of everything that I have done and continue to do to that person. Your other parent, a victim of my covert and possibly overt abuse for years, may be triggered by your behaviors, which will make it harder for both of you to cope. That's my plan. I will most certainly block any form of therapy and probably turn you against family and friends that are important parts of your life, protective parts, particularly if they are people who support the adult victim. This is my goal: to destroy any relationship you have with the adult victim, to destroy any part of your life that is good and positive for your development. It keeps me in power, and that is always what is best for me. If I can compromise you, if I can make you aware of the fact that you are invaluable to me, that you are only an object, but that your only choice is to align with me, then in that, you will not value yourself. And then you may in fact have maladaptive coping. The end result may be that you seek out similar relationships in your own life, or perhaps that you're the perfect prey for abuse. And it is possible, due to the course of control that you have experienced, that you will have significant trauma manifested in self-sufficiency issues, trust issues, anxiety, obsessions, depression, with self-medication or other types of self-harm the result. None of this matters to me. All that really matters is that I've fractured that attachment. All that really matters is that I win. So the coercive controller main focus all of the time is to win. We really have to level up our game and strategize and think like they do, which is so hard because that doesn't come naturally to us. We have certain traits that make us extremely vulnerable to being the perfect prey of someone like the coercive controller, a charlatan. Truly the world's greatest actor until they aren't, right? We can actually see them for who they are. And when we do that, we are so empowered that we can strategize what their next steps are. Our children are part of their plan. Our children are set up in this way to be the perfect prey. Their brains are developing. Their bodies are growing. They're learning the world. They want to trust everyone implicitly from the moment they are born. It's part of nature. I'm always amazed at how quickly we expect them to grow up and for them to understand the nuances of various behaviors. They can't understand that. It's beyond the realm of comprehension for us. It's beyond the realm of comprehension for a vulnerable, developing child. Every child wants nothing more than to be loved and accepted by their caretakers. The covert abuse has been there since the very beginning, and it was easier for the abuser to hide it because you were none the wiser. No fault of your own. This is exactly how they planned it. But this idea of a cult does pop into place here. Family systems can be like a cult, and everyone in the family system falls into line. It's just easier to do it. Before we know it, tons of lines have been continually crossed. For our children, this means that again, if this started day one, they are learning very early on how to be a soldier, just in case a battle is determined necessary. If they have to go into battle and they're going to choose sides, they're going to choose the side of the oppressor. The oppressor has more power. It's going to make sense. And so if you have been diminished over and over again in that household, and again, since day one, and now you're leaving, or shall I say escaping, it's truly an experience for your child to be living in. Every single thing that they've been hearing for years is now going to be literally turned on them. The abuser will capitalize and remind your child of all those things, anything that you might have done that was seen as an indiscretion. Your child will feel vulnerable and will feel either that they have to stick up for you or that they have to align. The children who stick up for us are the children who have more clarity. But if there's never been a reason to give your child clarity because you didn't even know what was going on, then your child might align. In either case, what we know is these coercive controllers tighten their grip on our children. These children are used as weapons to hurt you, the protective parent. And all along, that's been prepped. And we ask, why can't these children see clearly? Why do children align after knowing how horrible the family situation was? How horrible the home situation was? Well, just like you, they become trauma bonded to these abusers. Just like you, they have cognitive dissonance. They don't want to believe it's as bad as it is. And because their brains aren't developed, it's going to be much more challenging, which means it's so important that you begin to work on that attachment with your child. The coercive controller is consistently trying to fracture it. You need to be very consistently trying to mend it. It's all about connection. The more that we connect with our child now, whether they're aligned or not, the more that we can connect with them, the safer they will be. The reality is even if they are not aligned with the coercive controller, I always say things can change on a dime. We need to prepare ourselves that our child who maybe sees it clearly today may not see it clearly in 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years. So perhaps begin thinking about the ways that you can creatively, intentionally, and with authentic attunement connect to your child. I call it the CIA. How can you creatively create more opportunity to connect with your child? You need to be intentional about it. And we need to be attuned to them when they are ready, when they want to connect. This is attunement. And it has to be done in an authentic way. If they think it is inauthentic, they already don't trust us. They will not come towards us. We need them to come towards us. Keep trying and showing up in a way that they see you are not broken. This is the beginning of their healing. This is the beginning of their having clarity. This is the gift of perspective. We give it to them as much as we can without trying to convince them. It just becomes a part of who we are. This podcast is for educational purposes only, and individuals should seek out appropriate medical or mental health services from a professional if they or anyone else they know is at risk of injury or harm. The views of this podcast and those discussed here are solely those of the podcast author and are not intended to represent anyone else's opinion. Thank you for listening to Perfect Prey. You can find the show on my website at iknowyourheart.com or coercivecontrolconsulting.com, or by subscribing to the show wherever you find your podcasts. I'd love your feedback, and I'm always looking for ideas on how to continue to expose coercive control as the significant harm that it is and the child abuse that it is. The best way to support the show is to rate and review Perfect Prey on your podcast platform and to share it. This helps others to find us. Perfect Prey is written by me, Dr. Christine Cocciola, and with the help of my amazing assistant, Sheena Pastor. Thank you. And remember, you are your child's saving grace. You are showing your child a path to freedom, freedom from the coercive controller.